Everyone knows the Lancaster bomber, but when they needed to turn it into a transport, they built two completely different aircraft. One you've heard of. One turned up in a Glacier after disappearing for more than 50 years. I made a video about the Avro York, talked about how it shared the Lancaster's wings, its tail assembly, its undercarriage. But here's the thing, I left something out. The York wasn't really a Lancaster conversion at all. It had an entirely new fuselage, square section, double the internal capacity, designed from scratch for transport purposes. Roy Chadwick, Avro's chief designer, kept the bits that worked and threw away the rest. The York was a new aircraft wearing old wings. The Lancastrian? That was the real conversion. The one where they actually took a Lancaster bomber, stripped out the guns and said, "Right, this'll do." No new fuselage, no redesign, just the same aircraft that dropped bombs on Germany, now carrying passengers to Buenos Aires. And nobody talks about it. The conversion process was brutally simple. Remove the forward turret. Remove the aft turret. Cut away the mid-upper turret position and fit fairings. Take that distinctive glazed nose where the bomb aimer once lay and replace it with a streamlined metal cone. Do the same at the tail. Fill in the windows with styrene backing. The fuselage itself, that oval-shaped, 5-section construction that had carried 7 crew members and enough ordnance to flatten a city block, stayed exactly where it was. This created an obvious problem. The Lancaster had been designed around a bomb bay 33 feet long. Bombs are heavy and compact. Passengers are the opposite, bulky but light. So the Lancastrian could never carry many people. 9, perhaps 13, depending on configuration. What it could do was fly 4,150 miles without stopping, with 2 400-gallon long-range fuel tanks fitted where the bombs used to hang. It was a compromise aircraft, a stopgap, the obvious quick solution while better designs were coming. But one of them flew into a mountain in the Andes and wasn't seen again for half a century. The aircraft was called Stardust, registration GAGWH, constructor's number 1280. A Lancastrian Mark III, built specifically for British South American Airways, BSAA, as the second of 18 improved variants. She first flew on the 27th of November 1945, received her certificate of airworthiness on the 1st of January 1946, and was delivered to BSAA 11 days later. For 18 months, Stardust worked the long routes: London to Buenos Aires to Santiago. 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin T24/2 engines, each displacing 27 litres and producing 1,650 horsepower. Some of those engines had been overhauled and converted to different specifications: 2 to Merlin 502 configuration, 1 to Merlin 502. But all of them had accumulated less than 1,200 hours total time since new. This was not an aircraft with mechanical problems waiting to happen. The crew that assembled for the final flight were the kind of men the war had produced in abundance and peacetime struggled to employ. Captain Reginald James Cook, born 15th of March 1918 in Derby, held 3 decorations for gallantry. The Distinguished Flying Medal from his time as an observer with 15 Squadron, flying short Stirlings on raids against France and Germany. The Distinguished Flying Cross, awarded 20th of March 1945. The Distinguished Service Order, awarded 18th of September 1945, earned while flying Mosquito fighter bombers with 608 Squadron, the elite Pathfinder Light Night Striking Force. His citation mentioned a daylight raid on enemy warships at Brest in December 1941. Despite fierce opposition, his navigation brought the bombing formation to their target at exactly the stipulated time. Exactly the stipulated time. He'd crossed the Andes 8 times as second pilot. This would be his 9th crossing, and his first as captain on the complete London to Santiago route. First Officer Norman Hilton Cook, no relation, held a Pilot B licence endorsed for Dakota aircraft. Second Officer Donald S. Checklin had his own DFC, his own wartime story. Radio operator Dennis B. Harmer had served in both wartime and civilian flying. Flight attendant Iris Mawson Evans, known to passengers and crew as Stargirl, had been a chief petty officer in the Women's Royal Naval Service before joining BSAA. 5 crew, 6 passengers, 1 woman and 5 men, 3 British, 1 German, 1 Palestinian, 1 Swiss. Among them was a King's messenger, a British diplomatic courier. His presence would fuel decades of conspiracy theories. The flight left Buenos Aires at 1:46 in the afternoon on August 2nd, 1947. Routine. The Lancastrian climbed to 24,000 feet to cross the Andes, well within its service ceiling of 25,500 feet. The route required them to fly over some of the highest peaks in South America, then descend into Santiago's Los Cerrillos airport. Expected arrival 5:45 p.m. At 5:41 p.m., 4 minutes before scheduled arrival, radio operator Harmer transmitted a message in Morse code. The Chilean Air Force operator at Santiago received it loud and clear, extremely fast but clear. ETA Santiago 17:45 hours, Stendek. The operator didn't recognize that last word. He requested clarification. Harmer repeated it twice. Stendek, Stendek. Then nothing. Stardust never arrived at Santiago. Air Vice Marshal Don Bennett, the legendary RAF commander who had led the Pathfinder force during the war, personally directed the search. 5 days. Chilean teams, Argentine teams, BSAA pilots flying the same route, searching for any sign of wreckage. Nothing. The search covered the area where the crash site would eventually be found. They flew directly over it and saw nothing, because by then there was nothing to see. The aircraft had hit a nearly vertical snowfield near the summit of Mount Tupungato, a dormant volcano standing 21,555 feet high, and triggered an avalanche that buried the wreckage within seconds. The compressed snow turned to ice. The Lancastrian, her crew, her passengers, and whatever answers she carried, became part of the Glacier itself. For 53 years. The theories proliferated. Sabotage. Perhaps the King's messenger was carrying something someone wanted destroyed. Mechanical failure. Navigation error. UFO abduction, fed by that inexplicable final word. Stendek. What did it mean? Was it a code? A warning? The hypoxic ramblings of an oxygen-starved radio operator? An acronym? Hundreds of proposed explanations emerged over the decades. None satisfied everyone. Meanwhile, the Glacier did what glaciers do. It moved. Slowly, imperceptibly, the ice carrying the Stardust's remains crept downward. Inches per year. Feet per decade. In 1998, 2 Argentine mountaineers climbing Mount Tupungato stumbled across wreckage at 15,000 feet. Pieces of a Rolls-Royce Merlin aircraft engine, twisted metal debris, shreds of clothing. After half a century, the Glacier was giving her back. The Argentine army mounted a full expedition in 2000. What they found told the story that 50 years of speculation couldn't. A propeller, its condition proving the engine had been running at near cruising speed at the moment of impact. Wheels with one tyre still intact, still inflated, proving the undercarriage was retracted, proving this wasn't an attempted emergency landing. The wreckage was well localized, ruling out any mid-air explosion. This was controlled flight into terrain. A perfectly functioning aircraft, flown by a decorated pilot into a mountain he couldn't see and didn't know was there. Human remains emerged too. 3 torsos, a foot still in an ankle boot, a manicured hand. By 2002, 5 of the 8 British victims had been identified through DNA testing. The explanation, when it finally came, hinged on something no one in 1947 properly understood: the jet stream. High-altitude winds blowing at tremendous speeds in directions completely different from winds at ground level. On August 2, 1947, Stardust flew into headwinds far stronger than Captain Cook knew existed. His navigation was based on observed ground-level winds, but at 24,000 feet, the jet stream was pushing against him. His ground speed was far slower than his instruments suggested. He believed he'd already cleared the Andes. He began his descent into Santiago. But he was still miles to the east-northeast, still in the mountains, still approaching the cloud-enshrouded Tupungato Glacier at high speed. The official Argentine Air Force investigation concluded in 2000. The crash resulted from heavy snowstorm conditions and very cloudy weather that prevented the crew from correcting their positioning. Between 1998 and 2000, approximately 10% of the expected wreckage emerged from the ice. More is expected, both from normal glacial motion and, increasingly, from glacier melting. The mountain is still releasing pieces of stardust, still hasn't let go entirely. Some BSAA pilots never accepted the jet stream theory. They insisted Captain Cook, 3 times decorated for gallantry, meticulous enough to bring a bombing formation to its target at exactly the stipulated time, would never have begun descent without positive confirmation he'd cleared the peaks. But the wreckage doesn't lie. The propeller doesn't lie. The retracted undercarriage doesn't lie. He thought he was somewhere he wasn't. The sky killed him for it. And Stendek? One theory is mundane: hypoxia-induced scrambling, cold fingers and thin air at the end of a long flight. Or perhaps nothing at all, just letters fumbled at high altitude. The mystery endured for 53 years, and the answer might be that there was no mystery at all. Just weather, just wind, just the limits of what anyone could know in 1947. The Lancastrian, as an aircraft type, served until 1960, outliving Stardust by 13 years. 91 were built, some converted from existing Lancasters, some built new to the same design. They flew routes that modern jets cover in hours. They carried passengers who sat in modified bomber fuselages, listening to 4 Merlin engines working at cruise power for hour after hour after hour. And that sound. That sound. The Merlin was never a quiet engine. 27 litres of supercharged V12, the same power plant that dragged Spitfires through dogfights and hauled Lancasters over Europe. But 4 of them? 4 of them at once, for hours on end, with nothing but aluminium skin between your ears and all that combustion. You didn't just hear it, you felt it. A vibration that started in your chest and spread outward. A rumble that became part of your breathing. I've heard from viewers whose fathers flew these aircraft, whose grandfathers worked on them, whose uncles rode in them as passengers on routes that don't exist anymore, through conditions that modern aviation would never tolerate. Those stories matter. Those memories deserve somewhere to go. So if you flew in one of these, or your father or grandfather did, tell us in the comments. If you remember the noise, If you remember the cramped cabin and the long hours and the strange luxury of flying what was obviously, transparently, a converted bomber. If someone in your family has a story about the Lancastrian that's never been written down anywhere, this is where those stories belong. The York got the recognition. It was the bigger aircraft, the one with the new fuselage, the one that could carry more passengers in greater comfort. When people remember post-war British aviation, they remember the York. They remember it enough that I made a video about it. But the Lancastrian was the real conversion. The one that kept the Lancaster fuselage intact, that actually tried to turn a bomber into a transport without building an entirely new aircraft around it. It was a compromise, a stopgap, a quick solution that did the job for the few years before pressurized cabins and jet engines changed everything. And one of them hit a mountain in Argentina and spent 50 years entombed in ice before two mountaineers found pieces of her scattered across a glacier. Stardust and her crew waited half a century for anyone to find them. Captain Reginald Cook, First Officer Norman Cook, Second Officer Donald S. Checklin, Radio Operator Dennis B. Harmer, Flight Attendant Iris Evans. 6 passengers whose names history has mostly forgotten. They deserved better than to disappear without explanation. They finally got an explanation in 2000. Not a glamorous one, not a conspiracy, just weather and wind and the cruel mathematics of navigation error. But at least they got answers. The Lancastrian deserves something too. Not because it was revolutionary, it wasn't. Not because it changed aviation, it didn't. Just because it was real. Because real people flew it, worked on it, rode in it. Because their children and grandchildren still remember the stories. Because some of those stories have never been told. The Glacier is still moving, still releasing fragments. Somewhere on Mount Tupungato, there's more wreckage waiting to emerge. Pieces of Merlin engine, scraps of aluminium skin, perhaps more personal effects from passengers and crew who've been gone for nearly 80 years now. The mountain keeps what it takes, until it doesn't. 91 Lancastrians were built. The type has been reduced to photographs, to specifications, to the memories of people who heard those 4 Merlins and never forgot the sound. And to the fragments that an Argentine glacier is still slowly giving back. History forgot the Lancastrian. The York got the video, the recognition, the place in the narrative of British post-war aviation. The Lancastrian got a few footnotes and a mystery that took 50 years to solve. But Stardust's crew didn't fly footnotes. They flew a real aircraft on a real route over real mountains, with real passengers trusting them to get through. They were decorated veterans who had survived the war only to die in peacetime, doing a job that didn't have to be dangerous, but was. That deserves more than a footnote. So this is the Lancastrian story. Incomplete because the Glacier hasn't finished telling it, but finally told because some histories are too important to stay forgotten. Subscribe for more stories like this.